Good morning. I'm glad to see all of you here today. I know it's cloudy outside, but we still got the light on the Lord to give us guidance and direction in everything we do. I know last week I was scared to death. This week I'm just as scared to death. It ain't no different. So y'all pray for me as I go through this. Prayer for wisdom. That's a prayer we all should pray. This is our second lesson, and it's an important prayer in the Bible. Last week, remember, we talked about Abraham and his intercessory prayer for Solomon. This week, we're talking about Solomon and his encounter with God at Gibeon as he starts his reign over Israel as the king. You know, in the beginning, when Solomon was getting ready to do his reigning over this kingdom, he wanted it to be blessed of God. He was going to start out on the right foot. And I look around today at people who are in the leadership positions. To me, they ain't starting on the right foot. But as we read in here, Solomon did. You know, he witnessed God's work in the life of his father David. During the good times and the bad times, he was determined to consecrate his kingdom to God. And he does so through a royal and extravagant offering to God. And when I saw that, I thought, how could you ever be too extravagant when you worship or you offer to God? I don't think anything that we ever do when we worship could ever be too much. He deserves so much more than I could ever give him or ever do for him. You know, that night, God came to him had a conversation with him, and it dramatically changed the rest of his life. And as we study Solomon's life, we see that God faithfully kept his promises to Solomon, even though Solomon wasn't always faithful to keep his part. And to do that, you want to keep your commitment to the Lord, just like when we talked about before, last week, in your prayer life. And that requires sincere, humble prayer and study from the Word to be committed to what you're doing. It also requires that we listen to what God is speaking and how it applies to our lives and speaks it to us. In order to learn or gain wisdom, we got to listen. You know, God does not just go through the motions when we come before him. And we can't afford for our relationship with him to be routine, going through the motion, just say a few words and think, okay, I've done my part. Now, sit back and give me the blessing. Because it don't work that way. You know, if you say, I'm going to do this, Lord, you need to do this, Lord. And now there's a scripture that says, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. You know, we need a fresh encounter. I need a fresh encounter every time I go before the Lord. You know, and every day in my life. Now, you know there's a difference between wisdom and knowledge. We learn about things. We're taught different ways. We're educated in so many different ways. But education does not make you wise. Believe me. Because, now bear with me, you can educate an idiot. And it does not give him wisdom. It only makes him an educated idiot. And he has a certificate hang on the wall that says, I'm educated. But it doesn't say, I have wisdom. You know, there's a lot of educated idiots in the world. True wisdom and the ability to use that wisdom in choices that we make, the way we react to whatever situation we're in, whether it's a trouble situation or a trial, that comes from God. And obedience to God's word is the first act of wisdom. True wisdom is not a once-in-a-lifetime step. daily process. And it goes until the last breath that we breathe. For me, I'll never have it. I don't believe I'll ever have the wisdom that Solomon demonstrated. Sometimes I think when I go to do something, Lord, how would you do this? Show me what to do. Tell me what to do. Because I'm lost. And that's the place I need to be going to. You know, you're choosing between two paths, the righteous path or the worldly path. And it said that knowledge is power. I hear that a lot. But knowledge without godly wisdom is powerless. I will say that again. Knowledge without godly wisdom is powerless. I even saw this morning where they were talking about different things that are being taught in the schools. And they're wanting to pull out a lot of these things that have been taught in schools. Because they don't think it has any bearing on anything. And a lot of it's coming from parents finally getting involved to see what their children are being taught. And we need to be doing that all along, but it begins in the home. You know, you got to have wisdom to use the knowledge, or it becomes useless. Now I'm going to tell you a story about useless. This is a one-word phrase. And if you know me, and I say this word, somebody or something or some kind of suggested guideline or something has happened. So how would I say this gently? I think the way to say it gently, the person or whatever's happened has actually pushed my button to the max. Because it's one of those, what my grandpa used to call a $10 word, which meant to me, if he used that $10 word, you ain't got to ask him what it meant. You know what it meant when he said it. Here's the example. A while back, probably a little bit over a year. Actually, it was during the time that Danny was in the hospital. And I was at home, alone, you know, of course. And something happens, you're going to be at home by yourself. And I go to let my little fur baby go potty in the backyard. And my backyard is fenced in. What do I see in the yard? Next door. Standing up on his back legs, looking in my direction, a raccoon. And you might think, oh, how cute. Not. That little cutesy creature could rip your face off with one little swipe. Not to mention the diseases that they carry. You know, so I grab my little bubba and I take him inside. In the backyard of my neighbor on the other side, she's outside with her 3-year-old little girl, and they're swinging and they're playing and they're, you know. And as I tell her, I say, look. She grabbed that little girl up, scooped, run to the front of her back porch, and there she's standing there. Now, I've got my phone in my hand. So I call animal control. Come to my rescue. Well, meanwhile, she calls her husband, who, by the way, is a KPD officer. Well, he shows up with 2 other officers. They're all dressed in uniforms, real, you know, official-like looking, written out. And they're just looking. At a safe distance, I might add, not getting nowhere near. And they bend down, and they walk around, and they look. And now the animal control officer finally arrives, and he's in his truck, which has got these nice pretty little kennels on it. He's got these things, these net things, or whatever it is they use. All the equipment that he needs. He gets out and he asks me, do you live here? Hello? I'm on the other side of the fence. So I say, no. So he says, well, I need the homeowner's permission to do anything here. I said, hold on, hold the phone, I'll call him. So I get him on the phone, tell him what's going on. He gives permission, he can do whatever you need to do to remove that little garment. So now this animal control officer, he walks from one side to the other side. The raccoon walks from one side to the other side, back and forth, and all of a sudden this raccoon stands up on his back legs. And he shines them teeth at this officer. Now this officer is over 6 feet tall. He looks like he lifts weights. This big, muscular man, well, he gets a little card out, and he starts writing on this little card. He comes over to me, and he says, call these people and tell them your problem. You know, they'll come out here, they'll take care of it. And oh, by the way, you got to pay them to do this. You know? I said, well, why did you not do it? Why can't you take care of it? Well, I can't do anything unless it's sick or it's posing a danger to somebody. So I said, what do you think he's doing, sir? No response. So he goes to get back in his truck. I walk to tell the neighbors the real good news I just got. So all the way, I say, useless. You are absolutely useless. You are just useless. My point in this and talking to you and telling you is this official officer had the official truck with the official equipment, had the education that could remove this problem. When he was called on to use the knowledge that he had, it was like the degree on the wall. Without wisdom to put it to use, useless. So that's why I say, if you don't use your wisdom with the knowledge, it's useless. Our lesson begins in 1 Kings 3, verses 1 through 4. And Solomon made affinity with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had made an end of building his own house. And the Lord and the wall of Jerusalem was round about. Only the people sacrificed in high places, because there was no house built unto the name of the Lord until those days. Now, you always thought about high places when they would talk about high places. They would talk about the shrines, the places where they would offer to the idols. But in this instance, the high places, that is not what they're talking about. It's because the tabernacle was there. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David, his father, only he sacrificed and burnt incense in the high places. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. 1,000 burnt offerings did Solomon offer upon that altar. And when it started, it was talking about the marriage of Pharaoh's daughter. When that happened, it was one of alliance. One of those things, oh, I love you, let's get married. It was to provide protection for Israel. And Solomon's zeal for the Lord was fueled by his father's example. And Gibeon was an important location. He had seen his father's example of living for the Lord. Can our children see that in us? Now, I'm not saying this in a way to be boastful. What I will say is, like I said last week, I'm praying for my son. He's in the deepest, deepest trouble. He said, call Mama, pray, Mama. Pray, Mama. And I pray for you, son. But I'm telling you, you got to give your heart to the Lord. When he went to Gibeon, he offered 1,000 burnt offerings to the Lord. I thought, could you imagine in today's economy how this would be a multi-million-dollar offering, depending on which animals he sacrificed? You know, I went to the grocery store the other day just to get some meat because Danny's got to have something with iron in it. His iron is low. I walked back there and I looked at it. I looked at the man back there at the counter and I said, I just want one little steak. I don't want the whole cow. I mean, look at the price of this. So when he did this 1,000 off, I thought, how much money that would have cost just for the animals, much less everything that went with it. You know, there is evidence from ancient times that people would go to a shrine, a holy place, and they would worship there. They would sleep there in hopes that God would appear to them in a dream. And that's what happened to Solomon. This sacrifice of so many animals, it didn't happen just boom, boom, boom. You know, when you read it at first glance and you keep going, it almost gives you the sound or the impression that, oh, he did this one day and that night it happens. It couldn't have, because there's no way to process all of that in just, one night. The sacrifice had taken so many days that the priest preparing and offering the sacrifices, and Solomon, all his entourage that was with him, worshiping in the daytime and sleeping at night. How many of us today would make that kind of commitment? Praying, worshiping, seeking God's presence and what we needed from him. It's hard enough, I'm telling you, to get somebody to say a 5-minute prayer. A lot of those that I know, it's hard enough to get them to come in here and sit down on the pew once a week. But these people were so committed, they're going to stay there, they're going to sleep there, they're going to be there 24/7 until they hear from the Lord. That's commitment. In 1 Kings 3 and 5, it says, in Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give thee. He didn't appear to him during the sacrifice, but at night in a dream. There are times when we expect God to speak because something really spiritual is going on. Or sometimes, you think maybe, well, I've prayed a lot, or I've done this, or I give that. And he chooses the time and the place. And it's usually when we're still that he speaks to us. It's not dramatic. I mean, it may be for some people, but usually it's this gentle whisper in the night. It's not these crash boom cymbals, blah, 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 blah. It's when we are listening. The problem that most Christians, and I'm including myself today, is you got to be still long enough for God to get your full attention. Long enough that he can speak to us. Because he's not going to compete for our attention. You can't say, come on, Lord, there's such and such coming on TV at 8 o'clock. If you're going to say something, come on. You got to be full on attention with him. In that dream, God says to Solomon, ask. Now, when I was looking at this, I thought, he said, ask. That wasn't a request. It wasn't even a suggestion. It was a command. He said, ask. Ask. And the second part was this wide open question, what shall I give you? Well, if I asked that question of my boys when they were raised and coming up, it'd been a shorter list for them to put down what they didn't want. as opposed to what do you want me to give you? It was the other way around. But when he was talking, this was God, the creator of the whole universe, asking Solomon what he wanted. And I had to think, what would I have asked for? Or what would you have asked for? The TV show comes to mind, and let's be honest, who wants to be a millionaire? Ask. Our society has been called an aspirational society. We all aspire to something. But what is it we aspire to do? You can look at almost any advertisement. You can look at almost any magazine or any TV show or any computer screen, and you can see what the world wants for us to aspire to. They want us to be aspiring for wealth or fame or beauty, which definitely does not stand before you. Power. Have you seen any ads lately that says, I'm encouraging you to become wise? No. Reading on in 1 Kings 3, verses 6 through 8, it says, And Solomon said, Thou hast showed unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth, and in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept him for this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father. And I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. That scripture gives a lot of information about Solomon's attitude and his thinking process. You know, in the first part of it, he's aware that God's merciful provision in the life of his father David. He doesn't forget, he doesn't take for granted the heritage of his father. Today you think about it, and it's more like, when mine's coming up, well, I deserve whatever you got. And he knew, David knew he did not. David had walked with God in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart. Yet Solomon recognized he could not live on what God had given his father. I can't live on what God gave my mother or what God gave my grandfather, even though my grandfather was a Church of God minister. And I know he walked before the Lord the right way. I witnessed it. I sat under his preaching many times. Even when it was just me and Mama on the front pew, I still got the sermons. So I witnessed it. I knew it. I knew he did what was supposed to, but I still cannot walk under that. I can't live under that. Solomon understood that his position, where he was a privilege from God, and it was not from human. Man didn't put him there. He acknowledged that he called him Lord. He said, "Oh Lord." And in that place, he's meaning Yahweh, the Lord, the God of Israel. He acknowledged it. Further, he said, "My God, Elohim." He is going to serve that God. He acknowledged and owns that he has shortcomings. Oh, nobody here would do that, would you? You don't have shortcomings. But he knows what he does not know. You know, he says he's but a little child, and at that time he was about 20 years old, and according to then, you were a man when you hit 20. I gotta tell you, there's some out there, and my son one of them. He's getting close to 40, but I still would call him a little child. Yet he doesn't know how to reign properly. He wants to reign according to God's present will for Israel. Remember Abraham when we talked last week? Abraham said he was but dust and ashes. And Solomon says he is but a little child. They both humbled themselves when they were speaking to the Lord. He knows he needs a vision from God. He needs to be able to guide God's people according to God's will. Wouldn't it be great if the leaders we had would acknowledge this same need and seek God's wisdom? We are supposed to be one nation under God, not men. Where they're going to need godly wisdom. In 1 Kings 3:9-10, it says, "Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy great people?" And the speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. It pleased the Lord. Yes. What he said. That is a goal of mine. And I would hope everybody, that when you speak to the Lord and you pray, that it pleases him. That what you're praying, the way you pray it, the way you come before him. Solomon said, what he needs, he doesn't possess it. That his task is more than a mere human ability could do. You know, a spiritual matter requires a spiritual empowerment. His job included making difficult decisions to judge thy people, he said. Solomon has to be able to discern between good and evil. He needs wisdom, he needs insight, and ability to understand. He also knows that no one is going to be able to judge this great people of yours. No mere man could ever do that. These are the same qualities that I feel is in desperate need in the positions of government today. Exactly what Solomon was acknowledging before the Lord. You know, and it's our responsibility to pray that our leaders get those things from the Lord. It is our responsibility. The scriptures tell us to do that. You know, what did the kings in the ancient world usually want from their gods? Well, you don't have to be an Einstein to figure that out. You know, the things that was written about them, and they often asked their gods for long life, for riches, death to their enemies. And notice how God explicitly says that Solomon did not ask for those things. People often talk about the wisdom of Solomon. But this lesson is not about the wisdom of Solomon. This is about the wisdom for Solomon. Because the wisdom of Solomon really is the wisdom of God given to Solomon as a gift. In 1 Kings 3:11-15 it said, "And God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast judged for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and an understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. And if thou wilt walk in my ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as thy father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. And Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And he came to Jerusalem, and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered up burnt offerings, and offered peace offerings, and made a feast to all his servants. Remember in verse 12 where we just read, he said, I give you what you asked for. And then in verse 13 he says, I also give you what you have not asked for. In the end, Solomon got both. Everything the other kings prayed for, wealth and honor, always lied. And God gives generously and abundantly above all expectations, because he said, I, God, do according to your word, Solomon. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one has been before you, and no one will arise after you. Solomon gets wisdom plus wealth and honor, and it all is a gift from God. A gift from God. You know, I thought the greatest example of that giving, that loving gift that comes from the Lord, was when God gave up his son. And he gave up his son so that his children, that's us, would not have to die. You know, in 1 Corinthians, Paul reminds us that Jesus' death on the cross is the wisdom of God. Even though many in this world would say that was foolish, but from the beginning, the very beginning, you go back to the very beginning in Genesis, that God's wisdom was already in place. It was already in the works. And not all of us can be, you know, super intelligent. Not all of us can be a great athlete. You know, not all of us can be really skilled in business deals, or we can't all be musicians. We can't all be singers. We can't all be teachers. But all of us can pray for the wisdom that comes from God. You know, the Lord also promised him long life, but that life had conditions with it. His life had to reflect the will or the walk in my ways and the word, my statutes, and my commandments of God. When we genuinely seek to know the heart of God, when we prayerfully seek his wisdom and his will, our Heavenly Father will carefully guide us, whether we're on the peak of the mountaintop or we're down in the valley. He takes the time to listen to us. And we need to listen to him when he says, this is the way, walk here. You know, the next part of the lesson is from 1 Kings 3:16 through 28. Then came there 2 women that were harlots unto the king, and stood before him. And the one woman said, O my Lord, I and this woman dwell in one house, and I was delivered of a child with her in the house. And it came to pass the 3rd day after I was delivered, that this woman was delivered also, and we were together. There was no other stranger with us in the house, save us 2 in the house. And this woman's child died in the night, because she overlaid it. And she arose at midnight, and took my son from beside me, while thine handmaiden slept, and laid it in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. Right there, we've been fighting words for me. And when I rose in the morning to give my child suck, behold, it was dead. But when I had considered it in the morning, behold, it was not my son, which I did bear. And the other woman said, Nay, but the living is my son, and the dead is thy son. And this said, No, but the dead is thy son, and the living is my son. Sounds like Jerry Springer, don't it? Thus they spake before the king. Then said the king, the one said, This is my son that liveth, and thy son is the dead. And the other said, Nay. And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought the king a sword. And the king said, Divide the child in 2, and give half to the one and half to the other. Then spake the woman, whose the living child was, unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son. And she said, O my Lord, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. But the other said, Let it be neither mine nor thine, divide it. Then the king answered and said, Give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. She is the mother thereof. And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. You know, when I was reading this, it come to me, this could almost have been an episode of CSI or Law and Order or Bones or, you know, some other TV crime drama. Good. It could, because because today when we read it, it's got suspense in it. It's got the goody woman, the baddie woman. There's two women. One's good, one's bad. And it's also got the cop. But in this case, you know, it was the king. It was Solomon, who needed to find out which one was which. And of course, it had a cute little baby, a gruesome plot. That included the possibility that this cute little baby could get cut in half. It was a dramatic scene. When we read over it, a lot of times we just kind of skim right across it. But this was drama in real life. It could have been so easy just to focus on the maternity dispute or what Solomon's wise judgment had done. But in reality, when you really look at it, this incident is really just an illustration of what God is really saying here. Think about it. He's saying if we're gifted by God in some way to be beneficial to others, why should we not be surprised that God will give us an opportunity to use that God-given gift? It's like when you give I would give my grandma Christmas presents. Oh, thank you, but it went on the shelf. Well, I gave it to you to use. Well, let's just put it up there. Yeah. But Solomon had sought from God an understanding heart to judge his people. And that's exactly what God gave him. When you ask God for something, He's going to give you exactly what you asked for. You know, Solomon quickly understood the dilemma, and he summarized their position. He called for a sword, and he ordered the child cut in two, and half be given to her, and half be given to her. When they heard that, that first woman, she didn't hesitate. She immediately gave up her claim to the child. She just wanted him to live. Her love and her compassion and her motherly instinct would rather her son live than to see him killed. To see the second woman was fine with the decision. Didn't matter to her because it wasn't from her body. You know, if she was to be deprived of her son, she didn't have no qualms about the housemate wanting to do the same thing. Because it said misery loves company. Well, so does sin. One sin loves another sin. And it leads to another. And it leads to another. Solomon knew that the true mother wouldn't allow her child to die. So he ordered that woman's son to be returned to her. God's nighttime promises to Solomon were confirmed before all of Israel. Wouldn't it be wonderful for the whole world to see God confirm a promise He'd given you? You wouldn't even have to say a word. You could say, oh, look what God did, what she asked for. Look. And I can tell you, every day of my life for the past year, you wouldn't even have to ask me. I hold a hand. I look into the eyes of a walking miracle that lives with me. Now, he had a bad day yesterday. He's had a bad day this morning. But I'm still believing God to touch the issue that we're facing right now. Because He didn't promise and give me that promise to just take it away. You know? He used the wisdom God had given him. Do we use the wisdom that is available to us? So I'm going to share another story with you. Like I said, recently over this past year, I have been forced to do something that I would never choose to do on my own. Since Danny had his heart attack, it was followed by several surgeries. He had to be taken to Charlotte, and due to that being the only place that he could get the care and the surgery that he needed for his LVAD, which is a heart pump. Now, in order to get there from where we live, you got to travel the interstate. Oh, my. And did I say, oh, my goodness. And yours too. Interstate driving is not for me. Not. I don't want anything to do with it. Believe me, I'd rather be a passenger. I can close my eyes then. You know, each time I had to drive there, I had to go for training. I had to learn how to take care of him. I had to learn what to do on a daily basis. I was a nervous wreck. My arms were literally just like that, just as tight as they could be. My heart was beating so fast, it was beating faster than the speed limit. And I'm not even sure I took a breath from the time I got on the interstate until the time I got off the interstate. Scared? No. Terrified's a better word. That's a better way to understand it. I was so unsure of where I was going. And obviously, at least for me, you know, I couldn't read off directions and stay focused on driving. And I'm constantly watching these other cars that's going by me. Oh yeah, no, don't forget these huge trucks that they're whizzing by me. And they're so close to you. They were so close to me that I think if their windows had been rolled down, I could have smelled their breath and told you what they had to eat last year. I thought, ooh, I would just shake. If the car wasn't shaking, I don't think how it would. But on my cell phone, I have this little app that comes up. And it will tell me if I put the address of where I need to go. There's this sweet, precious little lady that comes across there. And she starts talking to me. And she says things like, in 2 miles, take this exit. Turn here. She talks me all the way there till I get to the hospital or the office or wherever I need to be. And then when I am so blessed to be leaving Charlotte to come home, that precious little woman starts talking again. And she gets me back home. And even if I miss a turn, which I have done, or made a wrong turn, which I have done, she comes back, she regroups, and she gets me right back on track and heads me in the right direction. And she don't scold me, she don't yell at me, I don't get no whoopings. The day that I got the blessing that I got to bring Danny home after this 72-day long stay in the hospital and rehab, I told Danny, as he getting in the car, now I love you, but don't talk to me in the car. I got to listen to the little lady on the phone. She's going to help me get where I need to go. Now, you might think, as much as I've had to drive the NASCAR highway back and forth so many times, I would be at ease. Not. Every time you think I'm kidding you, I'm not. Literally. Like this. Blinders on. I'm holding my breath. And the words all I can get out of my mouth is, Jesus, take the wheel. And thank you, Jesus. And the thought came to me when I started writing this down, just how much that my interstate driving is a reflection of how I, or even us, should be when we navigate this road that we travel every day of life. Every morning that my feet hit the floor, I need to be focused on my final destination to get to heaven. As my day begins, I want to ask the Lord for understanding, for a discerning spirit with His guidance. And each of us are in the driver's seat of our own life. Nobody can get there by being a passenger. We all have to be connected to the only source, the only guide, to be able to tune into that precious, sweet little voice of the Lord. Listen to each turn so we can get there. And when we make a wrong turn or we get confused because we're still not perfect, pray and listen as our directions get recalculated and He gets us back on that path. And not till I cross Jordan will I ever stop listening. I've got to stay that way. I've got to stay arms locked, blinders on. And as Paul said in Philippians 2:12, with fear and trembling, and obey. And this week, though, I've been reminded to pray for that wisdom. It's a generous gift from God, and there's no need for me to wait for him to appear in a dream, because the Word tells us to come before him, to pray for what we need, to have that understanding mind and that spirit of discernment. Solomon's options were virtually unlimited. He could have asked for anything. But wisdom and knowledge he asked for, not for himself. He asked to benefit others. That prayer, like I said, is it's a powerful resource, and we too often take it for granted. When Danny started having this problem yesterday, I could have said, let me grab the phone and call the baby. No. I put my hands on him and prayed. And I'm trusting God to take care of this. So I feel like there's probably some here today, and you need some kind of special need, or you got some type of wisdom that you need from the Lord. So I want to ask, does anybody have any prayer requests that we can help pray for? I know we need to pray for Vicki and her family today. This is a hard day. I know I've walked those shoes. We need to really pray. We need also to continue to pray for Brother Fosdick and his mother. He's in a bad place right now with her. Has anybody else got any requests they'd like to be made known? Yes, ma'am. Listen to the mother.
Jamie Roach's mother-in-law is at the hospital this morning with a possible heart attack.
Oh, dear.
So remember his wife and that situation too. And also remember Pastor Shoemake as he's traveling up here for the funeral, that the Lord will touch him today, because you know he's still a sick individual. So
Yes. Anyone else? Well, that being said, Lord, Blackie, would you lead us in prayer, please?
Father, today our hearts are humbled by the serious news that are before us. Lord, there's grieving people that need your comfort and need your help. There are those who have serious illness and cancer, Lord, that need your touch, need your healing. But Father, you know every need, every heart, and every life. And as we come to you, Lord, you told us to cast our cares upon you because you care for us. We trust in that, Lord, your holy word, that you will reach out and touch every need today. Bring comfort where comfort